I will not begin with a long introduction. At 102 years old, you no longer have patience for decoration. You begin with truth. And the truth is this: most of my life, I was busy with things that did not matter. I did not realize this at 30. I did not realize it at 50. I did not even realize it at 80. I only understood it recently in the quiet hours of the morning when the house is still and the body feels like an old machine that has served its purpose but continues running out of habit. For decades, I believed life was about proving something, proving that I was capable, proving that I was worthy, proving that I could build, provide, achieve, and endure. I chased recognition like a thirsty man chases water in the desert. Every promotion felt like survival. Every victory felt like oxygen. I thought meaning was something you constructed through effort, like a wall you build brick by brick until the world finally nods in approval. But the world does not nod for long. Applause fades faster than you think, and when it fades, you are left standing with the sound of your own breathing, wondering why the silence feels heavier than the struggle ever did. When I was young, I measured my days in productivity. How much did I accomplish? How many problems did I solve? How many people depended on me? I believed exhaustion was proof of a meaningful life. I wore fatigue like a medal. If I was not tired, I assumed I had not done enough. Now, at this age, I measure my days very differently. I measure them in moments of presence, in how clearly I can hear the birds outside my window, in whether I can feel gratitude without forcing it, in how long I can sit without needing to prove that I am still useful. This shift did not happen suddenly. It was not a dramatic revelation. It was more like a slow tide pulling back from a shore I had lived on my entire life. One day I noticed the water was gone. The noise, the urgency, the endless pursuit, they had all retreated. What remained was a quiet question I had avoided for nearly a century. What was all of it for? I am not saying effort is meaningless. I am not saying ambition is wrong. Those forces built the world you now live in. They built the homes we shelter in and the systems we rely on. But somewhere along the way, many of us forget that effort is supposed to serve life, not replace it. I spent years preparing for a future that kept moving further away like a horizon you can see but never touch. I told myself, one day I will rest. One day I will feel satisfied. One day I will understand why I worked so hard. That day kept postponing itself until time itself began to run out. At 102, you begin to see life not as a straight road, but as a circle that slowly closes. You see patterns that were invisible before. You notice how often you chose speed over depth, noise over meaning, obligation over authenticity. And that is when the real understanding begins, not with pride, but with a gentle, almost painful clarity. If you are willing to listen, I will tell you what took me a lifetime to learn. After you live long enough, you begin to see that most people, including the man I once was, confuse movement with purpose. We assume that if we are constantly doing something, constantly advancing toward some visible milestone, then our lives must be unfolding correctly. The engine is running, the wheels are turning, the calendar is full. Surely that means we are headed somewhere important. I believe this without question. In my 30s, my days started before sunrise and ended long after the world had gone quiet. I woke up already carrying a list of expectations. Responsibilities sat on my chest before my feet even touched the floor. I was proud of this pressure. I told myself it was evidence that I mattered, that I was necessary, that my existence had weight. But necessity is a strange illusion. The truth I only see now is that most systems keep functioning long after we step away from them. Offices find replacements. Businesses adjust their strategies. Even families, though they love you deeply, learn to survive your absence in ways that would surprise you. I'm not saying this to sound bitter. I say it because understanding it earlier might have freed me from years of invisible chains. In those decades, I measured my worth by how much I could endure. If I was exhausted, I felt accomplished. If I was overwhelmed, I felt important. Rest felt like weakness. Silence felt like wasted opportunity. I feared stillness because stillness had a way of revealing uncomfortable truths. It whispered questions I did not want to hear. Are you living your life or just performing a role you never chose? So I kept moving. I kept building. I kept proving. There were moments, of course, when life tried to interrupt my momentum. A child's laughter from another room, a sunset that lingered too beautifully to ignore, the soft hand of someone who loved me, waiting for my attention. But I treated these moments like brief commercials in the middle of a serious program, something to acknowledge quickly before returning to what I considered the real work of existence. Years passed like this, not slowly, never slowly. Time accelerates when you are not paying attention. It folds in on itself. Entire seasons disappear into routines that feel permanent while you are living them and shockingly temporary when you look back. I remember thinking that meaning was something you accumulated, like savings in a bank account. Every achievement was a deposit. Every sacrifice increased the balance. I imagined that one day I would reach a certain number, a level of success, stability, or recognition, and life would finally feel complete. But life does not work like a ledger. There is no final statement mailed to you confirming that you did enough. What happens instead is far subtler. You wake up one morning older than you expected to be and realize that the future you were preparing for has quietly transformed into the past you cannot change. This realization does not arrive with drama. There is no music, no sudden collapse of certainty. It is more like discovering a photograph of yourself from long ago and noticing the expression on your face. You see determination, yes. Strength, yes. But also a kind of distance, a subtle absence, as if part of you was always standing slightly outside your own life, evaluating rather than experiencing it. I cannot count how many conversations I half listened to because my mind was already planning the next task. How many dinners I finished without tasting the food. How many evenings I spent in the same room as people I loved while feeling mentally 1,000 miles away. At the time, I told myself this was the price of responsibility, that adulthood meant postponing pleasure in exchange for long-term security. There is truth in that idea, but it becomes dangerous when postponement turns into a lifelong habit, because the future you are saving for eventually arrives. And when it does, it asks a simple question you may not be prepared to answer. What did you actually live for? I began noticing this question in my 70s, though I did not fully understand it then. Friends started disappearing, first occasionally, then regularly. Phone calls carried softer voices, heavier news. Funerals became more frequent than celebrations. Each loss felt like a quiet message written in a language I was only beginning to learn. Still, I resisted. I told myself I was strong, that I still had time, that reflection could wait until later. There was always another project, another obligation, another reason to keep postponing the deeper conversation with myself. Looking back now, I see how gently life was trying to wake me up, not through catastrophe, but through accumulation. Small signals repeated over years, a sense of emptiness after achieving something I had pursued for decades, a strange loneliness in crowded rooms, the realization that being respected is not the same as being truly known. You may think you understand this while you are young. You may nod politely at the wisdom of older voices. I did the same. I believed awareness alone would protect me from regret, but awareness without change is just another form of delay. What I am telling you is not meant to discourage ambition. It is meant to remind you that movement, no matter how impressive, is not automatically meaningful. You can run for a lifetime and still arrive at the wrong destination. And sometimes the hardest truth to accept is that no one else chose that destination for you. It was simply the direction you never stopped to question. The deeper understanding did not arrive as a single moment of enlightenment. It unfolded slowly, almost mercifully, like fog lifting from a landscape I had walked across my entire life without truly seeing. At first I noticed only fragments, a strange heaviness in achievements that once thrilled me, a growing sensitivity to time, not in the dramatic sense of fearing death, but in the subtle awareness that every ordinary afternoon was now irreplaceable. In my 80s, I began to experience something I had never allowed myself before, long stretches of unstructured silence. Not the kind of silence that feels awkward or empty, but the kind that exposes how much noise you once used to protect yourself from reflection. Without schedules to chase or reputations to defend, my thoughts became clearer, and clarity can be a painful companion. I started to see the illusions that had guided my choices for decades. The first illusion was that security would bring peace. I spent years building layers of protection around my life: financial stability, professional recognition, predictable routines. I thought that if I could eliminate uncertainty, I would finally feel calm. Yet calm does not grow from control, it grows from acceptance. And acceptance is something I postponed until I no longer had the strength to keep resisting reality. The second illusion was that strength meant independence. I prided myself on needing very little from anyone. I believed that relying on others was a weakness I could not afford. But old age dismantles this belief with quiet persistence. Your body slows, your hands tremble. Simple tasks become negotiations with gravity and patience. And suddenly you understand that strength was never about standing alone. It was about allowing yourself to be supported without feeling diminished. There were evenings when I sat by the window watching the light change, realizing how many sunsets I had treated as background scenery. I had lived through wars, economic storms, personal triumphs, and devastating losses, yet the most profound realization came not from those dramatic chapters, but from the ordinary rhythm of days I had once dismissed as insignificant. I began remembering people more vividly than events. The warmth of a friend's laughter decades ago, the quiet disappointment in someone's eyes when I chose work over their company, the patient kindness of a partner who waited for me to slow down long before I knew how. These memories returned not as accusations, but as invitations to understand what truly shapes a life. At some point, I stopped asking, "What did I accomplish?" and started asking, "What did I feel?" This shift changed everything. Accomplishments are measurable. They can be listed, compared, displayed. Feelings are more elusive. They live in the spaces between actions, in the tone of your voice when you speak to someone, in the quality of your attention when another human being shares their inner world with you. I realized that many of my proudest achievements were built on a quiet absence, an absence of presence. I had been physically there for important moments, yet emotionally somewhere else, already planning the next step. Life does not punish you for this immediately. It allows you to continue, even rewards you for a time. But eventually the bill arrives in the form of a simple, haunting question. Did you truly inhabit the years you were given? There is a particular kind of grief that comes with this awareness, not the sharp grief of sudden loss, but a softer, more enduring sadness for the versions of life you almost lived, the conversations you rushed through, the risks you never took because stability felt safer, the simple joys you postponed until joy itself became unfamiliar. Yet alongside this grief, something unexpected emerged, a sense of freedom. When you finally accept that much of what you chased was an illusion, you also realize that it is never entirely too late to change the way you experience what remains. At 90, I began learning how to sit without guilt, how to listen without preparing my response, how to appreciate a single quiet morning as if it were a rare gift rather than an unproductive delay. People often assume that wisdom arrives with age automatically. I can tell you now that age alone guarantees nothing. You can grow older while staying trapped inside the same assumptions that guided your youth. Wisdom only begins when you allow your certainties to collapse, when you admit that the map you followed for decades may have led you in circles. In these final years, I have discovered that meaning is not hidden in distant achievements or dramatic transformations. It is woven into the texture of ordinary existence, the sound of your own breath when you are no longer rushing, the steady presence of someone who chooses to sit beside you without needing entertainment, the quiet dignity of accepting each day as it comes without demanding that it justify itself. If I could speak to the younger man I once was, I would not tell him to abandon his ambitions. I would simply ask him to pause more often, to question the urgency he carried like a permanent burden, to notice that life was happening not only in the milestones he was chasing, but in the unnoticed moments that quietly defined who he was becoming. Because in the end, the greatest illusion I lived by was this: that meaning was waiting somewhere ahead of me. It was never ahead, it was always here. Now, at 102 years old, I no longer feel the need to impress anyone with what I have done. There is a strange and gentle relief in reaching a point where the world's expectations lose their authority. You begin to understand that life was never an exam you had to pass. It was an experience you were meant to inhabit. When time becomes visibly limited, your priorities reorganize themselves without effort. You stop asking how to make your days more productive and start asking how to make them more honest. Honesty, I have learned, is the final form of courage. It means admitting that much of what you feared was unnecessary, that many of the pressures you carried were inherited rather than chosen, that the version of success you pursued may not have belonged to your true nature at all. What really matters is surprisingly simple, and that simplicity is what makes it difficult to accept. We are conditioned to believe that significance must be complicated, that purpose must be proven through struggle. Yet the clearest truths of life are often quiet. They do not announce themselves with celebration. They reveal themselves in stillness. What matters is the quality of your attention, the way you look at the people you love when they speak, the patience you offer yourself when you make mistakes, the willingness to forgive, not because others deserve it, but because carrying resentment is a heavy burden for a heart that longs to feel light. What matters is presence, not the kind you perform for photographs or public approval, but the private presence that exists when no one is watching. The moments when you choose to listen instead of dominate a conversation, when you choose to rest instead of proving your endurance, when you choose gratitude instead of comparison. Health matters more than pride. Time matters more than status. Connection matters more than being right. These are not poetic ideas to me anymore. They are practical realities I confront every morning when I wake up and feel both the fragility and the gift of another day. If I regret anything, it is not the failures people might assume. I do not regret the risks that did not succeed or the plans that fell apart. I regret the years I spent living as if life were something to prepare for rather than something to live. I regret the conversations I postponed, believing there would always be another opportunity. I regret the unnecessary seriousness with which I treated ambitions that now seem small compared to the vastness of simply being alive. But regret, too, has its purpose. It softens you. It teaches you to look at others with more compassion, knowing they are also navigating illusions they cannot yet see. It encourages you to speak more gently, to judge less quickly, to appreciate the invisible battles every person carries. So, if you are listening to a man who has walked more than a century across this earth, hear this not as a lecture, but as a final offering. Do not wait for old age to grant you permission to slow down. Do not postpone your inner life until your outer achievements feel sufficient. They will never feel sufficient for long. What really matters is not what you accumulate, but what you allow yourself to feel. Not how far you travel, but how deeply you experience the ground beneath your feet. Not how loudly the world applauds you, but how quietly you can sit with your own thoughts and feel at peace. At 102, I finally understand that a meaningful life is not measured in years, titles, or accomplishments. It is measured in awareness, in presence, in the courage to live authentically before time gently closes the circle. And if you can understand this earlier than I did, then the long journey of my life will have offered you something of real value.